All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the changes that we've done to RMS that will be coming. So we're talking about a future version of RMS that'll be coming out soon that will include PII changes. So PII stands for personally identified information, right? Identifiable information. It's, you know, your telephone number, your email, your your income, anything related to something that can identify you. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you some changes that we've done inside of RMS that will be coming out. So Jennifer is going to talk about what we've done. The reason why we're doing this is because RMS contains PII, and we need to contain that PII to government people only that have verified PII training. So I'm going to let Jennifer McGugan take over. She is the manager of our help desk, so she'll be taking over here and sharing her screen, showing you the changes that we've done. Then what we're going to do is we're going to summarize what we talked about, and then we're going to take questions and answers on the PII section. And then, assuming all of you, if you would prefer, we can go over doing an Sdf import, importing that into a payment, and then doing mods and change requests. So those are kind of the most common questions that we get from government users. So depending on how much time we have and whether or not that's what you all would prefer us to do, make sure to communicate with us on Skype via text or WebEx. So type out your question on the keyboard, and Carrie will let me know what you guys' questions are, and Skype will monitor the questions there. So Jennifer, go ahead.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, as you said, my name is Jennifer McGugan, and I'm going to be going over PII changes that have been made to RMS that are going to be coming out in this next release. Really quickly, before we continue, I do know that Carrie is providing a list of the PII admins for your use. I believe it's going to be on SharePoint. So that way, when you do need access to PII, you will know who to contact in order to be able to take care of that. So what I'm going to go over today basically is all of the changes that are going to happen in RMS that are going to be affected by these PII changes. So that way we can ensure that any information that is related to PII can be safely transported across the network and not have to worry about getting somewhere that it should not be at. So the first thing that you will notice when you go into RMS is that when this release goes out, you will have about 15 days before you will have to contact your PII admin. There are two types of users that are going to be associated with this particular release. The first one is the PII admin. That person is going to be responsible for giving everybody access to PII data, which is going to be the labor interviews, the contractor payrolls, the labor folder inside the contract file module, and I will show you all of these momentarily. And that person gets that information by you going and providing them with your UPass PII expiration date. Because you have to do UPass on a yearly basis, you will also have to update your PII access in RMS on the same basis, because we will use the UPass PII expiration dates as the same expiration dates for PII inside of RMS. When you contact your PII district admin, you need to make sure you give them an email address that you are currently using, and you check to make sure that you get the notifications. Notifications will come at 30 days, 15 days, 7 days, and then 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 days prior to expiration until it expires at 1 day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open it up and just show you the modules that are going to be affected by this. I'm going to go into this contract right here that I have on my test. Now I'm in government mode right now. You can tell that because of these blue tiles that are showing up here up at the top. And the three biggest ones that are affected are going to be this Contractor Payrolls module here, as well as this Labor Interviews module. If, when the release goes out and you have not gotten PII access within the 15 days, what you will notice is you will get an error message. That message will look like one of these two. You will see insufficient privileges for either contractor payrolls or insufficient privileges for QA labor interviews. Right now, the other place that you will not be able to see will be under the contract file module. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the contract file module to show you what you will not be able to see. And that is going to be this folder right here, this C labor folder. So inside the labor folder, you can see this is the labor interviews and the weekly payrolls. If you don't have PII access, you're not going to be able to see either of these when you go through. So if you go into RMS and you see either of those error messages that I showed you before, insufficient privileges, contractor payrolls, or insufficient privileges for QA labor reports, you will need to refer to the document for a list of the Pii admins that are in your district, and you will need to contact them with your Pii UPass certification expiration date. Depending on the district policy, some district policies might require that you actually send them a copy of your UPass certificate for the PII in order for them to verify the date for you. And also make sure that you show them that your email address that you would prefer to have your notifications sent to. The other place that you're going to go, I'm going to go ahead and click on the back button, and I'm going to bring up the contractor payrolls. This user actually has PII access. So with PII access, what you will notice when you click on contractor payrolls, nothing has changed. Everything looks exactly the way that it was. So if I click on the back button, it's going to be the same thing in the labor interviews module. So I'm going to open up the labor interviews module, and I'm going to see this here. Now, one thing to note, if you are inside RMS and you don't have PII access and you've requested access from the Pii admin and the Pii admin replies, you now have access, please try to access the section again. If when you go in there you still get that error message, most likely it's because you have not closed RMS completely. Once for these changes to go into effect, you have to completely close out of RMS and log back in. Once you have logged back in, then you will have access to PII as you normally would. The last place that PII is affected, I'm going to hit this back button right here, is going to be in the QA/QC reports, the QA daily reports. So when we go into this QA daily reports here, what you will see is inside a uncompleted QA daily, you're going to open that one up. And, oh, that was a completed one, my apologies. Let me hit the back button and choose one. Well, let me just create one. I'm going to go ahead and add a QA daily for today's date. I'm going to select today and choose OK. And then once it loads, here in the labor interviews, if I need to add any labor interviews, when I click on this button, if I don't have PII access, I will not be able to see this. So if you have PII access, you'll be able to see this and add data as you need, as it needs to be done. But that's another indication that you need to do PII. Let me hit the back button here. There is one other location that PII data is going to affect RMS, and that is going to be in the contract selection. So if you click on this contract selection here, this is at the root of the district. If you have access to the district office, I'm going to click on that, and you have access to contract files, what happens is if any of the contracts that are in here that you wish to download the contract files from, if you do not have PII access and there are files in the labor folders or the contract payrolls folders, you will not be able to download them. You'll be able to download all the other files, but you will not be able to download the files associated with PII until you have PII access rights. So those are the main places that are affected in RMS. Now, for contractors, it's a little different. They're only affected in one place. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the contractor module. And I'm going to walk you through what's different for them. So I'm going to open up my test contract. It's going to take it just a few minutes to go inside and look it up. And you can tell this is contractor mode because these buttons up here are gold. Now I've been working in this contract right here, and since this is the recent one and the one that I want, so I'm going to click here. However, if you want, of course, you can enter the 1327 here. You only need to enter the last 4 and it will show up down here. Double click on that or press enter and it will open up the contract. Once the contract is open, the only thing that the contractor is going to be affected is going to be under the administration, contractor payrolls. So inside the contractor payrolls, they're not going to notice anything until they go to complete a draft payroll. So I'm going to walk through the process of doing that. I'm going to open up this draft payroll here. I'm going to enter my payroll number. This is going to be payroll number 3. And I don't need a reference number in this case. There are 5 employees and they worked 15,000 hours. And we're going to add some PII data to the document package. And then down in the document package, I'm going to click on this Add button. And once that document package opens, as you can see, nothing has changed so far. Now I'm going to click on this Add button, and then I'm going to choose Add from File System. Once I click on that, it's going to bring up a dialog box to allow me to choose the file that I'm looking for. So in this case, I'm going to click on some document with PII data. And I'm going to say OK. And then it's going to load it into the document as usual. At this point, everything is still the same. Nothing has changed. They can still sign it if they need to. They can still open it and make edits and changes. What happens is once they're finished making changes and they click on this Submit for Review button, they're going to get this message, are you sure you're ready to do this? And I'm going to say yes, because I am ready. It's going to warn me that I haven't signed anything, and that's okay, because in this case I don't need to, but it will be up to the district policy and the particular file that is being in there as to whether or not it needs to be signed. I'm just going to click yes. And at this point, I'm going to hit the back button, and I'm pretty sure my payroll is ready. So I'm going to click on this Payroll Ready for Review. And it's going to warn me, once it's ready for review, you're not going to be able to undo this. Are you ready? And I'm going to click yes, I am ready. Now, at this point, as a contractor, I'm not 100% sure I loaded the right document, or maybe my coworker was the one that sent the document. So I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to go into this document package so that I can look at it. And I'm going to try clicking on it and nothing is going to happen. This is where the change occurs. The contractor is no longer allowed to have access to this document package because we need to protect it as it is sent over to the government. We do not want anybody to be able to intercept this. So the only people who now have access to this is going to be the government. So if the user needs to confirm that something is correct, they will need to contact their core representative and ask them, hey, can you check this file for me? And then the core, coming back over to the government, we're going to go into the particular file that we're talking about. But before I do that, in contractor mode, I need to get out of here. So I need to hit the back button 2 times to get out of there, so that way I don't accidentally lose any information. In government mode, I'm going to go into the contract that we were just in. And then I'm going to go for the administration tab, and I'm going to go into the contractor payrolls. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the file, the payroll that they had submitted to the government. And this is a little different. Sometimes it doesn't get refreshed properly, so I'm going to go ahead and back out really fast and go back in. This usually doesn't happen. It's just that today, because we're working on a test document, sometimes it does have issues. Take it just a few minutes to go back in. And I'm going to go back into the district. And then I'm going to open up the contract again. Under the contractor payrolls, so it is still not showing up. Okay, I have a feeling that this particular contract is just not. So these are test contracts. Unfortunately, with test contracts, a lot of stuff has been done with them, so sometimes they do have problems. In this case, I'm going to click on this refresh button. Okay, well, in this case, what I can do is I can look at another one. So what happens with this is what you can do is you can go inside the document package, open up the file that they were asking about, and as you can see, it will open up over here, and you can look at it. And they had told you what it was that you were supposed to look for, and you can see that, yes, it has all of the information, or no, it's missing information. Now, if this one happens to be missing information, then you will not return this document package back to the contractor for corrections. What you will do instead is click on Payroll Rejected on the back page, and then put in the comments, please add corrected data to a new document package and resubmit it. So the contractor will have to add another document package to add the corrected data. Now, say they sent something and it was not right and they needed it to be deleted. Now, depending on the district policy as well as the file that it is, you can actually go in here, click on this document package, and choose delete. But I wouldn't do that if it's already been accepted. So don't accept a document package unless you are 100% sure that it is the one that is going to actually go to PCF. So as long as it hasn't been accepted, you can definitely delete that as long as the district policy allows it and that particular file is allowed for that as well. So in here, the contractor realizes they did the wrong one, so they have to go back in here and they have to add a new document package. And it's saying there's already one open. Are you sure you want to create a new one? They're going to definitely say yes. Because even though that one is open, they no longer have the ability to edit or do anything in that document package. They can see it, but they can't do anything with it. So at that point, what we're going to do is we're going to click on Add, and we're going to do Add from File System, and they're going to go through the same process. And in this case, they're going to add another document. And then once this is done, of course, they have to click this Submit for Review button. It's going to warn them, are you sure you want to do this? And they're going to click on Yes, I am ready for that. It's going to warn them that it hasn't been signed if they haven't been signed. Again, signing is up to the district policy and the file that is being sent. And then we'll click on the Back button. And now, as you can see, there are two document packages in here. The contractor does not have the ability to delete either of these document packages, but they can add another one if they need to. So we're going to click on the Back button here. And I'm actually going to back all the way out of that contract. Now on the government side, as you can see, this wheel is spinning. What that means is there are updates to this particular contract that need to go through. And when you click on that button, it will go through and show you those. But again, because this one is broken, we're not going to be able to see that document package. But when you come in here, you'll go ahead and open up the draft payroll. You can double click on there and double click to open it again to see that the file is the correct one. Once it is the correct one, you're going to click on the Accept button down at the bottom that will show. And then you'll click on the Back button and then you'll check Payroll Accepted as long as everything is together. And that will take care of the differences for how contractors are going to be submitting their contractor payrolls. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and send this back over to Paul for any questions.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. All right, so we basically went over the changes in Pii and how it affects the contractor payroll as well as the labor interviews. So the reason why we're doing that is to safeguard Pii that gets into RMS. So to summarize the changes that are going on, right now we have contractors entering document packages into the contractor payroll and the labor interviews. As soon as they get those done and they send off those document packages, they lose access to that data. That goes over to the government, and the government is now in charge of that data. And on the government side, there are district administrators that need to go through the contractor staff and assign dates, the Pii dates, into the contractor staff for people that will get access to contractor payrolls and labor interviews. Without a valid Pii date inside of the RMS staff area, the government user will not be able to access contractor payroll and will not be able to access labor interviews. So this is kind of a barrier to entry. So those are the changes that are happening in an upcoming version of RMS. As Carrie mentioned, we're not going to throw the switch right away. We're going to give you some time to get your data out of RMS if you need to, and we'll should be sending out an email to let everyone know exactly when this is happening, the date, and whatnot, and what needs to happen. We are also recording these sessions and posting them on our YouTube channel. So it's going to take us about a week or so to edit the information inside of them, and then we can post them on the YouTube channel so that people that weren't able to make this meeting, if they wanted to make it, they could at least listen to it later to see what changes were happening. So we had a meeting with all of the district administrators yesterday to go over exactly what's changed inside of the PII area, in terms of contractor payroll, labor interviews, and whatnot. There were quite a few questions, so if there are any questions, feel free to type those out. If there aren't any questions, our goal is to hop right into the Sdf Import process. One of the commonly asked questions that we got from all of our users, they wanted to see what it looks like when the contractor imports an Sdf file, what the government has to do to accept the import of the Sdf file, going through a payment, and once they go through the payment, then how that looks after that whole Sdf process. So let us know if you want us to slow down, go faster. If you have questions while we're going, just type those out. We'll keep an eye on both chats. And if we get through it fast enough, maybe we can get through some mods and contract changes. Okay, right now we have 2 copies of RMS opened. Let me just double check. I don't see any questions here. Don't see any questions. All right, very good. So we have 2 copies of RMS opened up right now. On the left-hand side, we got the government side, and on the right-hand side, we got the contractor mode. So on the right-hand side, we know it's contractor mode because of the yellow or gold colored buttons on the top right-hand corner. On the government side, those are blue. And they look very similar, right? So we're going to have both up because on the contractor side, we're going to go to the import-export area. When we click on the import-export area, we're going to click on the NAS Sdf area. So, we're envisioning the contractor got a contract from the government. They've already got their users set up, and they've met with the scheduler. The scheduler's met with the government. They've agreed on a schedule. We know exactly what the contractor needs to put inside of their pay activities and whatnot. So the contractor got with their scheduler, and they have Primavera set up with an Sdf file. So the contractor is going to go in and add that Sdf file to RMS. And we're going to go through that process. So right now we hit the add button, and we're going to select that file to add that to RMS. So right now we're opening up Windows Explorer where we have the folder for all the Sdf files. It's it's not uncommon for there to be multiple Sdf files. So now we're going to hit OK to add that at the bottom. There we go. And the next thing that is asked is, what do we want our Sdf file to represent? So when we click the down arrow on the file type, we show the different types of Sdf file naming conventions that we can give it. So we can say, all right, this is the preliminary, this is the initial, this is an impact schedule, this is an update, this is the completion. So depending on what you want the Sdf file to be, the contractor can go in and select that. For this case, we're going to do the initial. Also, we can put the project ID in there if we want to add some additional information. Yep, go ahead and hit next. And then what we're going to do now is, after we hit next, RMS is going to ingest that Sdf file into the contract, but it's only going to put it in a holding tank. This holding tank is going to allow us to view changes that the Sdf file will do to the contract before we actually ingest it into the contract. And the contractor cannot do this without the government's approval. So on the government side, if you know that the contractor's imported an Sdf file, on the government side, we can go to the import-export area, and once we click on the import-export area on the government side, we can go to the NAS Sdef area. So as the government, you can go in and look at what the contractors put in there. So you can double-click on that and get the same view that the contractor gets on their side. So on the government side, we have the similar view that the contractor does. They don't need to do anything else other than actually add that file to the Sdef area. Now note, on the government side and on the contractor side, any number of Sdef files can be put into the contract. So those of you that have used RMS in the old days, RMS didn't have a history of Sdf files. Also, the government couldn't see exactly what was going on with the Sdf file until after the contractor imported it. So we're going to go back over to the contractor side. And on the contractor side, one of the big questions we have is how do we know what the Sdf file is going to do to the contract before we actually do the end-all import into the contract. So on the contractor side, first things first that we note is the approval status. The approval, we have not asked the government to import this Sdf file, okay? So right now, if the contractor tried to import the Sdf file, it would block them. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and look at the two different forms of import. Now, when we're using Primavera, the very first Sdf file that we get from the scheduler is usually the contract data, right? So the contract data is going to include features of work, it's going to include activities, maybe some schedule dates, start and finish. So there's two types of imports. We have the contract data and the finance data. That first button there that says preview data import into contract, that is the option that we use to get the non invoice data into RMS. Down below we have the preview import earnings into payment. That's when we're ready to do our first payment. So that is what we'll click when we do the first payment. So right now we're going to click preview data import into contract. And when we click on that button, what that's going to do is that's going to show the contractor what it's going to look like when we actually process the Sdf import. Now, nothing has been solidified yet. It has not been imported into the contract yet. The contractor cannot because it has not been approved. But this gives you an idea of what the Sdf file is going to change inside of the contract. It's very important to note when you're using Primavera and you're using an Sdf file, anything inside of RMS that is not inside of Primavera, by default, gets overwritten when you do the Sdf import. So Primavera is considered the system of record when it comes to financial data, to the schedule, to the activities, to the features of work. So anything done inside of RMS that's not in the Sdf file will get wiped out. So for example, if they accidentally do import an incorrect schedule, all they have to do is import the correct one, and it should overwrite everything from prior. However, with these new features of RMS 3, where they can see what's going on before they actually ingest the file, and you as the government can go in and approve the Sdf file, that should happen a lot less frequently. So on the contractor side, what we're going to do is we're going to hit the back button, and we're going to ask the government to import this file. So up at the top there, there's request the Sdf file to be imported. So we're going to click on that button, and you'll notice when we click on that button, the approval status changes from not requested to acceptance requested. So we're going to hop back over to the government side here. And when we click on that government side, there's a refresh button up at the top that's spinning. That's letting you know, hey, the server's got more information that we do not have yet on this copy of RMS. So whenever you see that refresh button spinning, that lets you know, hey, there's new data on the server. We need to hit that refresh button to get the latest data. You don't have to. You can always just hit back and continue on with your work. The next time you open up that window, then you'll be able to get the latest data. It's probably important to note as well, as you're working in RMS, to get the data to the server, hit that back button. That back button sends whatever you're working on to the RMS server in order to get that data saved. So you don't want to leave an RMS window opened up for a long period of time without hitting that back button, especially if you're writing something or doing something that needs to be saved. All right, so on the government side, we have the acceptance requested, so we're going to approve request to import. That's that green button at the top. We're going to click that. When we click that option, that's going to let the contractor actually import the Sdf file. So we're going to go through that process right now. So when we go over to the contractor side, what we're going to do now is we'll notice on the contractor side that refresh button is spinning. So we're going to hit refresh to get that updated status. Now, usually the contractor is not going to have their side up right next to yours and all that. So, refresh buttons only happen if you got them up side by side or you're sitting in the same office and you don't want to exit out and come back in. So right now we have the approval status accepted for import. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to do two imports, right? We're going to get that contract data in, and then we're actually going to import the payment. So first things first, let's go preview the data import into contract. And just so you note, on the government side, the government can do the same thing. They can also preview data into contract. They can also preview the invoice. So if you know that your contractor has an Sdf file and they've imported that Sdf file, you can go take a look at it right away. You can go look at it and see exactly what's going on. You can also approve their Sdf file before they ask for approval to do the Sdf import. So we're still here on contractor mode. What we're going to do now is on the bottom right-hand corner, we're going to click that button to actually import the Sdf information, the contract data only. So we're going to hit yes on this. Note that warning is letting you know that any data inside of RMS that's not in Primavera is going to get wiped out. So now it's going to go in and ingest that data into the contract. This is on the contractor side, right? They're doing the contract data only. Usually, this is the first thing that they're going to do with their Sdf import, right? So now we have that data imported into RMS. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go out, all the way out to finances and pay activities on the contractor side, because we want to see what the Sdf file imported, right? So I'm going to open up the finances and pay activities, and inside of there, this was blank before I did the Sdf import. So now I have my 53 pay activities. It's all balanced with the government's line item. So right now we have the current contract amount with the sum of all the activities. Everything's ready to go. Now I'm going to go check the progress payments and see if I can go and do a progress payment. Because it's very important. If I'm going to import a payment from Sdf, from Primavera, I need to be able to create a payment, right? So I'm going to go and make sure I have a payment available. And right here, payment number 7 is not started. We're going to hit the back button. We're going to go out to the Sdf file, and we're going to actually import the payment. So when we do the Sdf import, we should have progress payment number 7. Give me 1 second here.
Say, Paul, can I delete these payments?
Yeah, if you want to.
Okay. Actually, I cannot do it there, so I have to do it in the government.
The government side, yeah. We have a test contract here that we're using. So we did a whole bunch of Sdf imports on this before in the past. As you can tell from the contract title, Sdf payments and mods. Very important. All right, so we're going to go through and wipe out all the payments on the government side, and then once we get that done, we're going to go and do the Sdf import of the actual invoice itself. So once that gets done, we can go back and do that. So right now on the government side, we're going through and popping those out. And this is a test contract, so you won't be doing this in reality unless, you know, something really bad happened on the contract. And you got to restart all that. All right, so now we're going to go over to the contractor side and make sure on the contractor side that we get a fresh view of the contract, and then check the progress payments to make sure the progress payments are empty. And then what we're going to do now is actually do the Sdf import. So pretend none of those invoices existed, okay? So we're going to go back to import export. Once we go back to import export, we're going to go to the Sdf file. And again, the same Sdf file as we had before. And this time we're actually going to import the invoice. And that's that middle button, the preview import earnings into payment. So we're going to click on that button. And when we do that, RMS is going to tell us, hey, you are going to be creating invoice number 1. Would you like us to create it? You hit yes, and it's going to open up another screen here that gives you an idea of what this is going to look like. Because we imported the contract data before doing the invoice import, it's seeing that all of our activities with dollar amounts are now matched to the activities that exist in the contract, right? And on the bottom right-hand corner, it kind of gives you an idea of what they're going to be asking for earnings this period. Again, government can go in and open up this Sdf file and show what it looks like and how it affects the contract. You can do that with any Sdf file. So say I had 6 months of Sdf files, I can go in and see how that compares to current contract data at any point without messing up contract data by using the preview button. Now, when you're at the screen, you just hit back, right? Because you aren't going to actually import it as the government or the contractor. So on this screen right now, we are actually going to click on import into invoice number 1. When we click on this button, RMS is going to let us know, are you sure you want to continue? This is going to overwrite anything in that invoice that you've done that has not been input into the Sdf file. So if I went into the if I went into the invoice and I made some changes, but I haven't done it in Primavera, that'll get wiped out when I do the Sdf file import. But most people that are using Primavera, they are doing everything in Primavera anyway when it comes to the amount. So go ahead and click yes. When we click yes on this one, it's going to go through and actually process invoice number 1. So we're going to let it sit there and process that, and it's letting us know that we're good to go. Hit OK. And after we hit OK on this one, then we can go all the way back out and check the progress payments to see if it actually made that invoice. So now inside the contractor mode, we went to finances and progress payments, and note, pay request number 1 not complete by the contractor, which lets you know it's in progress. So we're going to click on prepare pay request number 1. And when we click on this button, it's going to open up the actual invoice that was imported from the Sdf file. So while that's loading, there we go. So right now we have total earnings this period, $10,908. The invoice has been imported on the contractor side. So the first thing the contractor is going to do is put in the dates at the bottom. They're going to put in the period through date and the invoice date, the payment invoice date. And again, they can go in and make changes to the screen if they want to, but it's ideal that they do it in Primavera, because anything in RMS that's not in Primavera will get wiped out the next time they do an Sdf import. All right, so the contractor next, they're good to go with their $10,000 908 pay invoice this month. They're going to check that requested earnings complete box. And when they check that requested earnings complete box, that's going to send the invoice off to the government. And it's going to give them a big warning message that says, hey, this transfers to the government for approval. Note that in this current state, while we're waiting for the government to approve the invoice, next time, if we did an Sdf import and we tried to import the invoice, it would not let us, because this invoice is awaiting approval from the government. So go ahead and click yes on this. And on the government side now, once this gets processed, we may have to hit the back button. On the government side, we can go and view the invoice that came from the contractor. So once this gets processed, we'll hit back, and it says in review by the government. We're going to hop over to government mode and check the progress payment area. And when we click on the progress payment area, we should see invoice number 1 in the, yep, there we go. So now if we double click on that, that'll open up the invoice on the government side. And there we go. Perfect. Okay. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this session over to James. He's going to talk about certain issues that can arise from importing an incorrect Sdf file or an Sdf file that doesn't do it quite exactly what you want to do. He's also going to walk through the invoice, give you some pointers, and if we have enough time, we can pop through mods and change requests. All right. Go ahead, James.
Sounds good. Thank you, Paul. Okay, so the government takes over, and they can make changes to this invoice that's coming in. The pay period start date, actually what I wanted was to have this to be the month of April. So the beginning is April 1st, and I'm going to change this to April 30th on the final date. I must enter in an invoice receive date, because if I don't, then it won't process the payment. So I'll enter in that I received it on the final pay period day. This doesn't have enough time to go into all of these details here. Another item, though, that you must have is the Payee Office. If you're doing anything with CFIMS, there must be a Payee Office. This address actually gets downloaded from CFIMS, cannot be changed within RMS, but must be entered within CFIMS with the vendor, and the vendor needs to be active. Once that is set for the contract, when you download from CFIMS, then this address will come in and is selectable within RMS. You go to the prime contractor in the administration screen, and you can select that so that it is set. If this is not set, on the final obligations tab, there will be an error saying that the Payee Office is not set. The next thing that the government will do is start looking at these tabs, and then they can get an idea what this contractor is asking for. Is this in line with what I was expecting? The requested activity earnings will list everything that this contractor is changing from the previous state. This will give us the requested amount. There may be negative amounts in here if something is reduced, and we'll look at that later. The allowed activity earnings is the tab where the government is going to do most of its work. The government will go in here, and you can actually make adjustments to this screen. So you could add or subtract any of these dollar amounts and then approve the payment. Subcontract earnings, this reports what the contractor actually put in for each of the subcontractors. In this case, there are none. The government cannot modify these values. The allowed activity earnings gives a summary for each CLIN, what the dollar amounts are, wrapping up the activities for each CLIN. The next tab, the additional earnings tab, has all kinds of details about deductions and allowed earnings that are available if you have in contract setup a selection that allows the government to enter in additional earnings for this contract. Then when the government is satisfied with this payment, they will check this checkbox on this tab. Otherwise, they will not be able to proceed. Total allowed earnings for this pay period entered. Basically, it's an agreement that these amounts are correct. This is not a one-way street. You can also uncheck it and go back and correct amounts later. Finally, you go to the Obligations tab. This is the final screen for the payment. This will wrap up all of the CLINs into obligations so that they're paid from the right obligations. Here, you can enter in retainage, other deductions, refunds, other refunds this period. Any errors that are occurring as a result of this invoice that will make it so that CFMS will not approve this invoice, most of those errors will be reported in the lower right. In this case, there are no errors. And we get a summary at the bottom of the screen showing us what is available for earnings, if there are any CFMS accruals, any previous earnings. This is the first payment, so there are no previous earnings. Then we have the obligation amount in CFMS for this obligation. Notice that there are two obligations, and if I want to see those for the second obligation, I click that line up above, and it will show me the detail down below. Once I'm satisfied that the dollar amounts are coming from the right obligations, I can click the NG93 completed checkbox. This will complete the payment, generate an ENG93, and put it in a document package. You can actually work with that document package by clicking on the following tab, the Document Package tab. You can sign the payment. Only the final payment in RMS is required to be signed in order to submit it to CFMS. CFMS will not approve final payments unless they are actually signed electronically. So there's a special process that one must go through for that. Okay, once you go ahead and exit, this payment is essentially complete. We are unable to actually click the Send to CFMS button, which would be one of the steps that you will do when you're actually submitting it to CFMS for payment. So this payment is essentially complete. Again, if there are any questions, feel free to ask them. So for the next payment, the contractor will be freed up at this point to be able to do another Sdf import and import it into a new payment and make a new payment for the following month. So I'm going into the import-export area in the Sdf area, just like we did before. This time, I'm going to click Add, select a file, and I'm going to choose a monthly update Sdf file. So this is for the next month. This is going to change a few things, a few dollar amounts for what may be billed for the work that was done this last month. The type I'm going to choose in this sense, this case, is monthly update. Again, these are just titles, so it doesn't change how this Sdf file is treated. It's just for label purposes only. I click the Finish button, and then it will give me the details of what is included in this Sdf. The summary is up above. Now I have a total cost to date of $105,458. Before, I only had $10,000. so I can see the differences. I can look at the actual Sdf file. You can actually click on it, do a Control-A, Control-C, and paste it into a notepad and save it into a file if you wanted. So I'm going to click the Preview Data Import into Contract like we did before. Notice this time I'm seeing some differences, especially the items in red are to be noted. When you look at this activity AT1001 was in my previous Sdf Import and previous payment. I actually got paid on that activity. It was the bond for the $10,000. But now it says this activity will be deleted. Why? Because it's not included in the Sdf file. If we went back and we looked at it, we could search and you would not find it. So this activity is a bond, but we have another activity by the same name. And it looks like the scheduler had changed it from AT1001 to AT1000. Maybe to correspond with all the other activities that end in 0. They wanted to start with 1000. So what happens is when an activity is previously paid on and you delete that within Primavera and you import it into RMS, that activity will go away, so the dollar amounts must be transferred to a new activity. And indeed it is. So we see that the cost for that activity is $10,908. So I'm going to go ahead and import that data into the contract. What this will do is it will set any values, any dollar amounts for any activities, scheduling dates, any features of work, and other things that are in the Sdf file. But it will not import any data into the payment. To do that, I've got to choose Preview Import Earnings into Payment. So I click that. Actually, I have to request the acceptance to import. That's a step that I forgot. So I'm going to go back to the government side and I'm going to approve this schedule import. Notice the request there. There's an acceptance requested, so I'm going to approve that request, go back to the contractor side, and I'll look for that, and it says now that it's accepted. So let me redo this. Import into contract. That's the message I should have gotten in the first place. Then I'm going to import it into the payment. So remember, there's two different things that you need to do with this Sdf import. Import the data, which is all the activity amounts, schedule, features of work, things like that, into the contract. And then we need to import the actual earnings into the payment. So when you do that, it will actually put it into that first one. Okay, one thing that I have noticed is that because we're not submitting these payments to CFMs, it does not free up the contractor to create the new invoice directly through the Sdf. So I'm going to go here and actually view the invoice number 2, which will create the invoice on the contractor's side. If we were doing the normal process of submitting these to CFMs in the normal course of invoices, this would allow the contractor to go in and create the payment with the Sdf. So now I can import this earnings into the payment, clicking the lower button. So I had to do that extra step to manually create the invoice and then import this into the payment because the previous invoice was not submitted to CFMs and approved yet. So we're kind of doing a loophole and getting this to process even though these have not been paid and submitted to CFMs yet. Now I can go back to the finances, progress payment area, and I can process this next pay request. I can click on these column headings and see what the dollar amounts are by sorting them to the top. And I can see that there's a $10,908 value there. If I go all the way to the bottom, or close to the bottom, I'll see a negative amount. This negative amount is from this activity that was in my previous payment. Because this activity is no longer included in any future payment. So I've got to take the money off of it that I already paid on it and put that dollar amount on another activity that the scheduler is now using. This is one way to correct these negative values. One of the most common tech support requests we get is a contractor or even government people at times calling up and saying, I've got all these negative values in my pay request. What do I do? And we will tell them, well, this is probably because your scheduler switched using activities in midstream in the contract. These activities were originally paid on, and now the scheduler decided to change how the activity IDs are listed. And so you could go in and make sure that the negative amount is put on the activities that are no longer used, and then put the positive amount on the new activities that replace them. And that's perfectly fine, as long as the scheduler is going to use those activities going forward. Another way to fix this is to go back to the scheduler and ask the scheduler to go back to using the original activities. Please don't switch activities midstream. This often happens when the scheduler is changed in the middle of the contract. Sometimes a new scheduler is hired and they take over Primavera and they have their way of doing things, and then they change the activity numbering because they're used to a different numbering system. That's okay, but you'll have to deal with this in one of these two ways. Okay, so here again, we're just going to go ahead and put in these dates. It won't matter at this point what the dates are, so I'm going to go ahead and just put them in and then complete the pay request on the contractor side.
And just so you know, James, we had a quick question on if there was a way to show the contractor and government side if the contractor is withholding legally from a subcontractor. So if you can cover that when you get a chance.
Very good. So there is the Subcontractor Earnings tab, and here is listed the deductions for the subcontractor. The contractor is the only one who can modify those. The government, again, cannot do that. So you could actually put in deductions here. And the contractor is required by law to let the government know that they are actually deducting from subcontractors. Okay, so I'm done with this payment. Then I'll go back to the government side. And when the government side looks at this, they will see the payment just as before, and we can edit this payment. And then we will note these dates that will come up in just a second. So one of the things that is going to prohibit this payment from being processed is that the payment invoice date cannot be before the date of the pay period from. So I'm actually going to go back and change this. This is in October. I'll just go ahead and set this on this date, through date, invoice received date. Set that. And then we can review. So when you go to the requested activity earnings, as we mentioned before, this is a quick snapshot showing us what the contractor is changing from the previous time. We can see that they switched activities. The same dollar amount was switched to a new activity. Then the allowed activity earnings tab, you can go ahead and change that anytime you like. So that's where the government can actually go in and change those amounts. You can see the subcontractor earnings here as well on the government side. And then this roll up into the CLINs view. Here again is where we do the additional earnings. One thing that we have let people know is that there is a roll-up of the activities into CLINs, but there's also a roll-up of the CLINs into the obligation line items, which is on the next tab. How the program does that depends upon a complex calculation. Normally, if you just keep doing everything straightforward and don't change anything on the obligation screens, everything goes fine. But if you start modifying on the obligations tab these amounts, then the program will try to adjust those amounts so that at the end of the contract you're not short dollars in those obligations. Let's go ahead and complete this payment. And then we'll go to the obligation tab. So this is where the CLINs are rolled up into these obligations. If you have multiple obligations, sometimes these amounts and the dollars are not coming from places where you think they should. And that is because RMS is trying to adjust for previous manual calculations. If you want a straight calculation of all the CLINs that are included in this pay request to go only to the obligations that those CLINs are assigned to and not allow RMS to try to adjust those through the complex calculation, that is where you would go back to the additional earnings tab and you would click on the periodic calculation, which only uses the amounts for this period. Here's a complex description of that. So then when you go back, it would calculate things differently. Here, this is very simple. We've got one CLIN and we've got one obligation that we're billing from so far. Notice the errors that we have here. So I was noting before, the pay period through date cannot be after the invoice received date. So we go back, the pay period through date can't be after the invoice received date. So here we've got pay period from and through and the invoice date and the invoice received date. Now we should be good. There are no more errors. I can click the NG93, complete. Are you sure? Yes. One other thing that I wanted to point out, we get an opportunity during these training times to point things out to people that they might not realize because they don't read the manual. We do have a manual that we've spent quite a bit of time editing all of these screens and pointing out all of the features, and these things are detailed. All the things that we're going through are detailed in those. But at the top of the screen, you'll notice that there are logs and reports. The reports, you can get an easy, quick view of the NG93 prompt payment that the contractor sent and the check that will actually be paid and other contract file reports associated with it. Here's a log of things that have gone past. Now, we haven't uploaded anything to CFMS, but if there are errors that have come back from CFMS, this payment did not process properly within CFMS, there will be a CFMS error entry up here. You can click on that and it will detail exactly what CFMS returned, saying what error CFMS found and why they couldn't process that payment. Again, we can't send anything to CFMS, so we're done with that. Let's go back and import the next Sdf file. Now this one will be a little bit different because this invoice is going to include a mod. So I'll select June, a monthly update, click the next button, choose the monthly update, and the finish button. And clicking the preview data import into contract, I notice immediately another red on the lower right-hand corner of the screen. The current contract amount is $948,550. Now, if I'm the contractor, I'm looking at this and thinking, you know what? I thought the government was going to do a mod. They told me they were going to do a mod. So I'm ready to bill for $976,497. At least that's available for the contract. I may not have finished that much at this point, but that's what I am wanting the current contract to be. So evidently, RMS on the government side hasn't done this mod yet. So that's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back. I'm going to request the acceptance to import, and then I'm going to call up the core representative, and I'm going to ask him, could you please complete this mod so I can do my next payment? Because I can't balance with it otherwise. And so then the government says, oh, yeah, I was meaning to get to that, so let's go ahead and complete this mod. So say that there's a power source change for this contract. Then what I'll do is to go into the finances area, the first step. By the way, let's just go real quickly and look at the contract finances. The contract finances, we have a couple different funding accounts here with different obligations. And if I look at the contract funding tab, this kind of summarizes it right here. The two different funding accounts, this $948,550 was part of the award contract. Now, if I'm going to do a mod, if the mod is not part of the options or anything, then it will actually be part of the current contract and not part of the award. So notice that that's a $0 amount. One of the mistakes that people make, I'll just point this out real quick because it's such a common thing that we get, is that when there's double the amount in the current contract amount, and it's more than what it should be. So I'm trying to do a mod, and I end up with twice as much of the mod amount that I should have. What people often do is they go into this award contract area, and then they enter the dollar value here, the $27,000 or whatever they're going to do. But that is not part of the award unless it is part of an option. There are certain types of options that can be part of that. So this should stay 0. This is not where I actually change the amounts. I don't go into the actual contract finances to change these amounts. What I do instead is I go back to the finances and do it in the contract changes and in the contract modification area. Okay, so adding a change request. Just click the add button. There are several different types of change requests, which is more than we have time to go into detail here. You could do a whole training on just change request by itself. But the simplest, easiest is a single part change request. So this is just going to be one single change request. I'm just going to do a one-time thing, and it's going to be a user changes, discretionary changes here. I'm just trying to add a little money to the contract so that this contractor can do this change that we've decided on. This will create a change request. I need to enter in certain dates, and for sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and enter in today's date because it's easy. I can just hit the enter key. The dates aren't important for our training. However, when you do the mods, it will be. Do not put anything in the date canceled, because if you do that, it'll actually cancel this entire mod or the entire change request, and you won't even be able to complete it. All right, you'll complete the requested name, the approval names, and so forth, but we're not going to do that right now. We're just going to skip by those things. There is, however, the agency code, mod type reason code. Those things are important, but again, we'll get into those in a time when we actually get into the details of all these change requests. Right now, we're just going to show you how you can actually create this change request and tie it to a mod due to the time constraints that we have. The BCD is a necessary item for most change requests. So I'll go ahead and add one here. Again, we're not going to fill out all the detail, but we can just put in a quick change, power source change. And I'm going to estimate this at $30,000 and an additional 30 days to the contract. If you have multiple phases in the contract, which is from P2, then you could put them in separate phases. Most contracts are only going to have one phase. Then you can put descriptions. We'll go back and go immediately to the status funding tab. This is where you're going to put the dollar amounts for these contracts in detail, along with the dates, negotiations, and so forth. Okay, so the BCD date is required when the BCD checkbox for BCD required is checked. So any of these checkboxes that are checked will require a date. If you do not have the dates for these when they're checked, then this change request will not be completed and it will not be available to link up to a mod. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a quick date here. I don't have to put a plans required date because I don't have that checked. I'm actually going to uncheck the proposal here, and I'm going to check the negotiations required. Say that I negotiated it and I agreed with the contractor that the value $27,947 for this amount. I'm going to put this on the second funding account, and I have a variance of 0. Notice this drop down, negotiated amount is the amount that actually gets dropped through on this change request. If you wanted the other amounts up here to be brought down, you can actually choose those in this drop down. In this case, I want the negotiated amount to be the actual amount of this change request. So once the variance is 0, I could change this to an approved status, and then I click back. For all practical purposes, our change request is done. The next step is to create the modification. So our quick little modification, I'll go ahead and click the Add button. I'll accept the reference number. By the way, these reference numbers, the format of those for the change request and so forth are set in the district policy. The first top area is the change request included in this modifications. You can select and add multiple change requests. In this case, we're just selecting one. The only ones that will be available are those that have been completed. Again, if there are missing dates, they will not appear. You will not be able to select them and add them to your contract. Notice it brought in this dollar amount. When you go to the CLIN area, this middle area, you can automatically create a CLIN to balance this modification, but we don't want to create a brand new one. It's easier if I just revise the existing CLIN. You can also manually add a CLIN here. But I have one CLIN. It's a real simple contract. I'm just going to increase the amount for this CLIN and make it really simple and quick. And again, this is going to be for the $27,947, the entire amount. You could split these up. Once I do that, notice that the CLIN associated with this funding account brings in this dollar amount. Then on the next tab, I put in the actual modification number that comes from SPS. We have a new ACWS interface that we're working on that will be taking over from SPS. These will normally be filled out. We'll go over those in another time. The key area that is required is this release mod area. This is actually where we do the funding. So if we're trying to get this done quickly, we'll go ahead and complete this with modifications funded with PRNCs in CFMS. You can check whether or not the contractor's signature is required. In this case, we'll go ahead and leave it, and then we'll enter in the dates. The date is due back and the date that the contractor signed it. The key area to continue in this case is this government signature. Once you do that, the funding becomes available. Now, at this point, because you're in the funding, you will not be able to go back and change things. Sometimes people want to go in and change the mod, and then they can't change this mod. So then they call us up and tell us they can't change it. Well, the way that you can actually change this mod is to uncheck these check boxes at the bottom of the screen if they're checked, and then finally remove the government signature date. You've got to remove that in order to change the mod. At this point, we're going to move forward and fund this mod. So I'm going to double click on this CLIN, and you'll notice this looks very similar to creating a brand new CLIN. When you create a brand new CLIN, you put the award amount in, and then you click the same funding button. And then we're going to put that total $27,947 right there. The variance is 0 on the lower right. I click the next button and finish. And that puts the funding in the proper place from the CLIN all the way to the funding account in CFMS and the PRNC. I click the back button. One final step that I need to do, because this is not available for the contract yet, I need to click this checkbox at the bottom of the screen, modification funded with obligations and CFMS, and then finally the modification completed checkbox. Once I do this, it gives me a warning that I need to balance my activities, but I'm going to let the contractor do that. In fact, the contractor has done it and is waiting for me to complete this mod. So I'll click yes on that. But once this final checkbox is completed, then this mod amount is now available to this contract. So I can actually go back and then look at the finances, current CLINs. Current CLINs is different than the award CLINs in the sense that it includes not only award amounts, but modification amounts as well, negative or positive. So when I look at the CLIN, the detail is down below. The initial award amount is there, and any mod amounts, changes to the mods, is also available to be seen right there. So then I go back, and this should be all completed. I can tell the contractor that the mod is completed. However, there's one more step that I need to do, and that is to accept this Sdf import. Otherwise, they won't be able to import it. So I go ahead and approve this Sdf to be imported, and then click back so that it is saved. Then the contractor will refresh, and we can see that the status for this Sdf has now changed to accepted for import. Again, this is a running history of all the Sdf files, and you can go back and look at the schedules, see how things have changed. So I go ahead and double click on this. The first step, again, the two parts. I want to import this into the contract, which imports the actual activity amounts, the schedule, features of work, and things like that. So I need to do that first, and then I will import the payment into the contract, or into the, the Sdf into the payment itself. So this just imports the activity amounts into that contract. So the second button here, preview import earnings into payment, is what actually imports it into the payment number 3 that I'm about ready to do. Again, you can see all these dollar amounts, what's going to be billed. Notice there's a lot more that's being done here on this invoice. which is probably also why that mod came about, because there's so much work that was done and something was discovered that needed more work. So I click this import into invoice number 3, and it will actually import all of these activity amounts into the payment itself. Now, if I had just imported this Sdf file into the contract, I could go to the pay activities like we did before when Paul was doing this, and we could see the actual dollar amounts that were available. They would be increased in the activities, the pay activities, but the payment would show nothing. The preview import earnings into payment would actually add these amounts into the payment. So that way the contractor doesn't have to add all of those activities within the payment themselves. So again, the pay activities are increased, all of these amounts, with that first import button, and then the actual import into the payment is done with that second import earnings into payment button. I like clicking these buttons at the top a couple times because it does it ascending and then descending, and that way you can get a quick, easy picture of all of these amounts to see all the activities that I just did a bunch of work on. So I can see the total amount, and once I'm satisfied, I can go ahead and enter in these dates. This time it will be a through date of June 30th. And just for a little bit of difference, I'm going to do July 1st here, and then the requested earnings complete. So now I've just billed against the mod the new contract amount. I can click the back button, which saves this payment so that it can be available to the government. So go back to the payment on the government side. I see invoice number 3 is waiting there, and I double click on it. If the contractor were not finished, I would try to open this and it would tell me that it's read only and that the contractor hasn't finished it yet. When the contractor has finished, then I'm able to edit this and then enter in the received invoice date. I'm going to go ahead and just enter in a date here because it doesn't matter for our training at this point. I see that on the requested activity earnings, all of these amounts that are brought in. I can adjust those amounts again on the allowed activity earnings, and if they entered anything for subcontractor amounts, they would be done here. I can also see the sum of all of the activities into the CLINs on the allowed activity or allowed CLIN earnings tab. Then additional earnings. Once again, if I want to go straight into the obligations, I can do that. This is so simple I don't need to do that, but it's good to know. Then I click the total allowed earnings for this pay period entered. Once I complete that, I can go back to the obligations tab and then look at these amounts and make sure that they're billed against the right areas. Notice that I had some amounts that were billed against obligation line item 2 and some other amounts against obligation line item 1 because of the work that was done. I can click the ENG 93 complete, and then it warns me that the previous invoice has not been completed by CFMS, and that's okay for sake of our training. So that completes the change request and modifications. Are there any questions? If not, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Paul.
All right, sounds good. So we'll keep an eye on both the WebEx and the Skype. If you have any questions or if you'd like us to talk about a specific topic, definitely ask in the next few minutes. Today we went over importing the SDF file on the contractor side. We went through how the government would accept that SDF file, how the government can view the changes that the SDF file does without actually implementing those changes into the contract. We went over doing a payment on the contractor side. We went through doing a payment on the government side. We looked at what happens if an SDF file gets imported that doesn't do quite exactly what we'd like it to do. We also went through the contract change, the contract mods, and of course in the beginning we talked about Pii and the changes that are going to be coming in the next month or so over contractor payroll and labor interviews. One thing that we haven't mentioned yet that we mentioned in our earlier training was that the CCB is working with RMS regularly to go over the change requests. So right now we have a change control board that takes in all the suggestions from all the users and tallies them up and comes up with a standard of requirements to make those changes happen. And we were talking about some of the changes that the CCB board went through over the last 6 months with RMS. For example, the ability to archive and delete contracts in RMS3, but not only archive and delete contracts, but batch archive and delete batch unarchive and batch archive contracts inside of RMS3. You can't actually delete, I'm sorry. So there's no deletion in RMS3 when you archive a contract. That's how you send it off to the archive database. And users can now unarchive and archive contracts. That was one of the highest requested features inside of RMS3. So the change control board went through that, gave us a set of requirements, worked with us for weeks on that, and we implemented that change. We also went through and updated the QA and QC report screen so that now you can tell from outside at the selection view whether or not the report went through to PCF and whether or not it was completed. Before, users had to go in and actually open up every single daily report, go look at the document package, and see if it was completed and sent off to PCF. So now on that selection view, you have the ability to see that. We also have better information on the Sdf Import screen. Statuses were added, and there's going to be the ability for the contractor to delete Sdf files that have not yet been approved on the government side. So if they accidentally import the wrong Sdf file. We also added extra contract notifications for contractor payroll. We have multiple prep and initial inspections for features of work. And we also made sure that when a transmittal is completed, it's locked down and sent off to PCF. Let's see here. One of the big features that are coming in the next few releases will be the mass signing of daily reports. So the CCB got together with headquarters and came up with an industry standard that allows us to go in and have the QA mass sign daily reports, and then the PE go in and sign the daily reports and complete out the document package and send that off to PCF. So one of the questions that we had, requests that we had with RMS was, that one-click stopped shop with transmittals. We want that everywhere, right? Daily reports is one of the areas where people have to do 30 or 40 clicks in order to complete out a daily report. So coming in the next few releases of RMS, thanks to the change control board, we're going to be able to do mass signing of daily reports. And just to give you an idea, we have a list of 20 to 30 changes over the next 6 months that are going to be added to RMS, and we talk with the change control board all the time. So if you have any suggestions, any ideas for RMS improvements that you have, then what you can do is send that off to the CCB. Carrie gave a list of people that are part of the CCB, including the Pii district admins. Then that your vote gets counted to the changes, and the more people that recommend a change, the CCB will look at that and get that off to us, and then we implement it. So definitely talk with your CCB rep if you haven't. That definitely helps us make RMS better for everyone, and we really appreciate your input as well as the ability to work with the CCB to come up with a combined standard.